I started to think that, criminals are just not that as ingenious or creative as they think, and the schemes they employ are pretty straightforward. To pay bribes, criminals have to steal money from a company. That is, they have to gain unauthorized access to company funds and circumvent financial controls. There are not an infinite number of ways to do that. And bribery schemes reflect this fact, I think, over the years.
Global companies face unprecedented risks and challenges in today's economy. To mitigate these legal and economic risks, companies are rapidly embracing and elevating the importance of robust ethics and compliance programs to promote positive corporate citizenship. On Corruption, Crime, and Compliance, you'll hear from industry leaders and insiders about how to create effective ethics and compliance programs that will mitigate risks and maximize financial performance. Here's your host, Michael Volkov.
Welcome. This is Michael Volkov, and you're here for another episode of Corruption, Crime, and Compliance. Today, we're going to do a deep dive into the Telefonica FCPA settlement with DOJ for $82.5 million. And Telefonica Venezuela, or its Venezuela-based subsidiary of Telefonica, which is a Spanish telecom company. But the Venezuelan subsidiary entered into a deferred prosecution agreement and agreed to pay over $85.2 million to resolve DOJ FCPA charges stemming from bribery payments to Venezuelan government officials to secure preferential access to U.S. dollars in a currency auction to trade bolivars for U.S. dollars. So the Telefonica Venezuela entered into a 3-year DPA and the filing of a criminal information in the Southern District of New York, charging the company with conspiracy to violate the anti-bribery provisions of the FCPA. Now, Telefonica Venezuela bribed Venezuelan government officials to secure access to the U.S. dollars in exchange for Venezuelan bolivars, and they concealed their illicit payments by purchasing equipment needed for their telecom operations in Venezuela at inflated prices from two suppliers who paid the bribes through intermediaries to the Venezuelan officials. Telefonica Venezuela is a subsidiary of the Spanish Global Telecom, and the Spanish Telecom trades ADRs on the New York Stock Exchange. Now, this bribery scheme only lasted for 2 years during 2014 and 2015, and they enlisted the assistance of two suppliers who wanted to provide equipment for their telecom services, and basically paid the government officials approximately $28.9 million in bribes, knowing that some of these funds would be paid as a commission to Venezuelan government officials. To conceal the bribes, Telefonica covered the cost of the bribes by purchasing equipment from the two suppliers at an inflated price, and they received, in exchange for these bribery payments, about $110 million through the currency auction, which it then used to purchase the equipment from the two suppliers that it recruited to join the scheme. And these funds represented over 65% of the funds that the Venezuelan government awarded in the 2014 currency auction. Under the DPA, Telefonica agreed to continue cooperating with the Justice Department's investigation. In addition, Telefonica agreed to enhance its compliance program. No independent compliance monitor was appointed, and report to the government regarding remediation and implementation. So they have to submit reports, but they don't have to have a compliance monitor. Now, applying the Justice Department's corporate enforcement program factors, DOJ cited the following: the nature and seriousness of the offense, credit for its cooperation, which included regular factual presentations, making employees available for interviews, production of a large amount of documents, collecting, analyzing, and organizing all the evidence and information with translations of documents. However, DOJ noted that Telefonica failed to timely identify, collect, produce, and disclose certain records and important information, which hindered DOJ's investigative efforts and reduced the impact of Telefonica's cooperation. Now, DOJ cited Telefonica's remediation efforts, including disciplining certain employees involved in the relevant misconduct, or who were otherwise made aware of the misconduct, including terminating employees, strengthening its anti-corruption compliance program by building and empowering an independent compliance function, appointing a chief compliance officer with direct access to the audit committee of the board of directors, and investing in additional compliance resources throughout its global operations. Also, they overhauled its review and approval process for transactions with non-standard pricing, including by ensuring that the compliance function reviews all such transactions globally. Also, they reviewed, enhanced, and tested its broader internal controls for pricing and other transactions with the assistance of a forensic accounting firm. They strengthened their processes for vetting, engaging, and monitoring third parties, including additional controls concerning payments to third parties through a proprietary software tool. And they established a risk assessment and audit process to regularly review and update the compliance program and otherwise mitigate business risks. Now, DOJ noted Telefónica has prior history, which includes a resolution involving a Brazilian subsidiary of Telefónica, which was the subject of an SEC enforcement action in 2019 for alleged violations of the accounting provisions of the FCPA. Based on all these considerations, DOJ awarded Telefónica a 20% discount from the 5th percentile above the low end of the applicable guidelines range. Now, when you read through the factual statement of the bribery offenses involved here, and they're starting to look more and more similar as we look at each incident, reading through each case, they all start to meld together. And I started to think that, criminals are just not that as ingenious or creative as they think, and the schemes they employ are pretty straightforward. To pay bribes, criminals have to steal money from a company. That is, they have to gain unauthorized access to company funds and circumvent financial controls. There are not an infinite number of ways to do that. And bribery schemes reflect this fact, I think, over the years. So Telefónica's scheme is nothing surprising. They had to bribe 2 Venezuelan foreign officials to secure access to the currency at which they would exchange bolivars for dollars. The value of the exchange at that time was that the price of U.S. dollars was well below the prevailing price for currency conversion on the black market, and that was significant and vibrant at the time. So they would get valuable U.S. dollars at a cheap price through the auction and then basically be able to cash in some of the profits and then use that for improper purposes, obviously. Over a 2-year period, they used a bribery scheme financed by 2 equipment suppliers, Company A and Company B, to ultimately purchase telecom equipment using U.S. dollars. See, the telecom suppliers did not want to take bolivars. So they said, you have to pay us in dollars. So Company A and Company B, when they insisted on that, pushed them towards and participated in the bribery scheme to get them access to dollars. And the bribery payments were pretty steep, totaling approximately $28.8 million in corrupt payments. Company A and Company B, in turn, funneled the dollars to the foreign officials through an intermediary company and a shell company. Telefónica financed the bribes by agreeing to purchase the equipment from Company A and Company B at inflated prices. And they used the money that they got through the auction to purchase those. Telefónica knew that a significant portion of the $28.8 million would be paid as a commission for the benefit of the Venezuelan government officials. Telefónica was permitted to exchange and subsequently received over $110 million through the currency auction, which it used to purchase the equipment. In total, in August 2014, the Venezuelan government awarded approximately $172 million to 16 telecom companies as part of the currency auction. Between the 2 bids it corruptly orchestrated, Telefónica received approximately 65% of the total currency awarded in the auction, and Telefónica was able to deploy these funds and less the $28.8 million paid to the intermediary and shell company, but they used the remainder of that to buy network equipment from Company A and Company B. And they upgraded their telecom services to customers in Venezuela. So let's go into it a little bit more. In May 2014, shortly before the currency auction was publicly announced, Telefónica Executive 1 was summoned to a meeting with Foreign Official 1 and Foreign Official 2 and Executive 1 that The Venezuelan government would soon be announcing a currency auction for the telecom industry, and that Telefonica Venezuela would only be awarded US dollars if it paid a commission on any funds awarded, meaning bribes that would personally benefit Foreign Official 1 and 2. In July 2014, using their personal US-based email accounts, Company A individuals exchanged drafts of a consultancy agreement between Company A's parent company and a yet unnamed counterparty to be identified by Intermediary 1 once then Telefonica Venezuela and Company A's bid in the currency auction was successful. So they were setting up a sham transaction to move the money. In August 2014, Intermediary 1 informed Company A employee that the counterparty for the consulting agreement would be Shell Company Number 1. At no time did Shell Company 1 or Intermediary 1 in fact perform any consulting services for Telefonica Venezuela. On August 4th, 2014, Intermediary 1 contacted Company A employee to relay that Company A had been awarded everything, all the US dollars that it had applied for through the auction. Also on August 4th, 2014, the Venezuelan government announced that Company A had been awarded approximately $55 million through the auction. 2 days later, on August 6th, the Central Bank of Venezuela debited approximately 609 million bolivars from Company A's bank account as the funds that would be exchanged for the US dollars awarded. Beginning on November 26, 2014 through December 2nd, 2014, an affiliate of Company A transferred a total of approximately 13 million, representing 25% of the 55 million awarded to Company A, to Shell Company 1's bank account in Luxembourg. Several of the transactions comprising the 13 million to Shell Company 1 then transited through correspondent banks located in the Southern District of New York, hence U.S. jurisdiction. Company A used most of the 55 million obtained from the auction as payment from Telefonica Venezuela for network equipment. Telefonica Venezuela reimbursed Company A for the corrupt payments of 13 million to Shell Company 1 by inflating the per unit cost of the equipment that they purchased from Company A. In May or June 2014, Executive 1 coordinated with representatives of Company B to use Intermediary 1 to facilitate Company B's participation in the upcoming auction. Between May and July of 2014, Telefonica Venezuela and Company B agreed that Telefonica Venezuela would directly participate in the auction and that the auction proceeds awarded to Telefonica Venezuela would be used to purchase network equipment from Company B. And in June and July 2014, Company B employee exchanged emails with Intermediaries 1 and 2 concerning the purchasing of equipment from Company B with the auction proceeds. Attachments to these emails indicated that Company B's prices were inflated such that Telefonica Venezuela would bear the cost of the bribes. So on August 4th, 2014, the Venezuelan government announced that Telefonica Venezuela had been awarded $60 million through the auction. And in August 2014, the Central Bank of Venezuela debited the bolivars and then transferred those for the US dollars. On August 18th, Telefonica Venezuela entered a contract with Company C, acting on behalf of Company B as its purported network integrator for the purchase of the network equipment. In fact, Company C never performed any services for Company B. On September 3rd, 2014, the Central Bank of Venezuela transferred approximately $60 million to Company C through a correspondent bank in New York. Now, on September 24th, 2014, Company C and Shell Company 1 entered into a commission agreement according to which Shell Company 1 would act as a consultant for the procurement of communications equipment for Telefonica Venezuela. Shell Company 1 issued an invoice to Company C for fees for $15 million. On October 28, 2014, Company C transferred approximately $15 million, 25% of all the funds that they were awarded, to Shell Company 1's bank account in Luxembourg, again, through the correspondent banking relationship in New York. Company B and Company C used the $60 million in auction proceeds as payment from Telefonica Venezuela for the network equipment And Telefónica Venezuela also paid the cost of $15 million to Shell Company 1 for the bribes that were paid to the foreign officials. Intermediary 1 and Intermediary 2, just to add icing to this cake, paid for also lavish expenses of Foreign Official 1 and Foreign Official 1's family. Beginning in December of 2014 and continuing through January 2015, Intermediary 1 spent more than $500,000 on a lavish vacation, must have been a heck of a vacation, in St. Bart's for Intermediary 1, Foreign Official 1, and members of their respective families. Additionally, in January 2015, using some of the corrupt proceeds received through Shell Company 1, Intermediary 1 spent approximately $605,000 on luxury watches and jewelry in St. Bart's, including for the benefit of Foreign Official 1 and Foreign Official 1's spouse. So let's talk and wrap this up with some lessons learned. This has not been a great year for DOJ's FCPA enforcement record. It's been disappointing with all the hoopla and pronouncements surrounding the global war against corruption. DOJ had suggested in 2023 and 2024 that they would be robust. Instead, this year was a year of fizzles, fits, and starts, and ultimately a slow year of FCPA enforcement. We will see what happens with the Trump administration. But there are important reminders here and lessons for all of us. Number one is look for situations where you run into currency market regulations. If regulated as in Venezuela, this can create significant incentives for bribery. DOJ has prosecuted companies and individuals for bribery payments used to gain access to dollars when a foreign government limits the conversion of local currencies for U.S. dollars. Many of these bribery schemes were executed to take advantage of the black market disparity in prices for U.S. dollars, which reflected the real price for U.S. dollars in the market. Telefónica was well aware of the risks that its subsidiary's ability to engage and manage its telecommunications system would require access to U.S. dollars, and bribery would be needed to secure such funds. Telefónica's risk assessment and monitoring of its bribery risks, however, ignored this significant risk in situation of Venezuela. By its deliberate ignorance, Telefónica acknowledged in its own way that it would permit its subsidiary to engage in bribery. Now, bribery financing schemes require tried and true methods to steal money from corporate coffers. Telefónica's scheme employed a basic system, using suppliers to overcharge for work that was never provided and making payments well above the prevailing market rate. Executing these financial schemes requires layers of paperwork and use of third-party intermediaries and shell companies. There's nothing new and unique here. These are common indicators of bribery. Basic questions as to the precise roles of the intermediary and shell companies and why they were needed would have uncovered the illicit scheme. Compliance professionals and business staff need to reacquaint themselves as to the importance of the basic due diligence processes and inquiries. Questions like, what are the qualifications and experience of a third party in the specific transaction or contract? What role will the third party play in securing the proposed contract? And how did the third party come to the attention of the business in connection with the specific transaction or the proposed contract? Aside from these basic qualifications, compliance professionals and business staff need to reaffirm adherence to financial controls. Two basic issues, pricing and invoice review, have to be followed so that potential corrupt schemes can be prevented. In the Telefónica case, telecom equipment was purchased at exorbitant prices as a means to finance bribery payments to Venezuelan government officials. Those payments were then funneled through intermediary and shell companies using sham consulting agreements where payments were authorized in exchange for no actual services. These are basic financial controls. We do not know how these basic procedures were ignored. Such dysfunction involved the complicity of not just the primary actors and the planners of the bribery scheme, but eventually has to include basic functions where people don't do their job and identify and follow up on red flags, such as contracting, accounts payable, and other financial actors. We do not know exactly what occurred here, but this misconduct takes more than one or two actors to execute in the real world. Okay, folks, that was just a quick look at the Telefónica case. Thanks again for listening, and we'll be back next week with another episode of Corruption, Crime, and Compliance.
If you enjoyed this episode, the best way to support the show is by subscribing on your favorite listening platform. To learn more and connect with Michael Volkov, go to volkovlaw.com.